Hello, I'm Philippa, and you're listening to Unapologetic Edge. Today, we're talking about resentment, and I want you to be really clear from the start. I'm not talking about the big, obvious kind of resentment, the kind where you can point to a clear betrayal or injustice or say, yes, that's why I'm angry. I'm talking about the quiet, shimmering resentment that shows up in capable, high functioning women who suddenly don't recognize themselves anymore. The kind that sounds like, I don't like who I'm becoming. I feel irritated all the time and I don't know why. I'm snapping at people I love over nothing. I feel ungrateful for a life I've worked really hard to build. And almost always, when women describe this to me, there's this tone of shame underneath, like they're confessing something terrible about themselves. Because we've been taught that resentment is a character flaw, a sign of bitterness, a failure of gratitude or perspective or maturity. But that framing completely misses what resentment actually is and what it's trying to tell you. So let's talk about it. Okay, so first things first. Resentment is not anger gone wrong. It's not bitterness. It's not ingratitude. Resentment is unexpressed boundary information. Let me say that again because it's actually really important. Resentment is what builds when your system keeps giving beyond its capacity, without relief, without recognition, and critically, without choice. It forms when effort exceeds return for too long. And I don't just mean practical return, I mean emotional return, relational return. The sense that what you're putting in is being met with something that nourishes you back. Resentment is the signal that says something is being taken that isn't being replenished. I am contributing more than my system can actually afford. This isn't sustainable and something needs to change. Resentment is your body keeping the ledger when your mind refuses to. And here's what makes it particularly tricky. Resentment often builds in relationships and situations that aren't obviously wrong or bad. You're not in an abusive relationship. Your partner isn't terrible. Your kids aren't monsters. Your job isn't completely unreasonable. On paper, everything looks fine, which is why when resentment shows up, it's so confusing and shame inducing. You think, I should be grateful. What's wrong with me that I feel this way? But that question, what's wrong with me? That's the wrong question. The right question is, what is my system trying to tell me? Why does resentment often increase in perimenopause and midlife? There's a very specific reason for this. Earlier in life, most women had enough buffer in their system to override discomfort and keep going. You could tell yourself things like, it's fine, I'll rest later. They need me right now. I can handle this. It's not that bad. And for a time, you genuinely could. Your system had enough reserve capacity to absorb imbalance and keep functioning. But as we talked about in episode 3, perimenopause fundamentally changes your capacity. Recovery slows down, stress tolerance narrows, the buffer you used to have starts disappearing. So the same emotional labor that you've been doing for years suddenly costs more. The same compromises feel heavier. The same unspoken expectations that you used to just absorb quietly start to actually hurt. What you once managed without much thought now registers loudly in your system. And this isn't because you've become difficult or bitter or less resilient. It's because your nervous system no longer has excess capacity to give away without consequence. The maths has changed. What used to be sustainable at age 35 is not sustainable at 45. Your system is operating with different resources and different recovery capabilities. And resentment is often the first signal that this shift has happened. Now, if you're a mother, resentment gets particularly complicated because motherhood is wrapped up in love, in identity, in moral expectations about who you're supposed to be. You're told both explicitly and implicitly that you should be patient. You should be grateful. You should feel fulfilled by motherhood. You should find joy in the everyday moments. So when resentment shows up, women panic. They think, good mothers don't feel this way. What does that mean about me that I do? And look, I need to be really clear here. Resentment in motherhood doesn't mean you love your children less. It doesn't mean you regret having them. It doesn't mean you're a bad mother. What it usually means is that you've been carrying too much responsibility for too long without adequate support. Too much emotional holding, too much managing of everyone else's needs and states, too much anticipating and smoothing and adjusting, too much self-suppression to keep the household functioning. And often when there is support offered, it actually doesn't land in a way that relieves the core burden. Your partner might do the dishes, but you're still the one tracking when the dishwasher tabs are running low and when they need to be ordered and whether the delivery timing will work with the rest of the week's schedule. Someone might offer to help with homework, but you're still the one holding the mental map of which kid struggles with which subjects and what approach actually works for them and when it's due. The practical task gets shared, maybe, but the invisible labor, the holding, the tracking, the anticipating, that often stays with you. And that's where resentment builds. Here's where resentment becomes particularly corrosive. Instead of listening to what it's trying to tell you, many women redirect it. They turn it inward as self-criticism. I'm so negative lately. I'm just hard to please. I've become such an angry person. I used to be more easygoing. Or they turn it sideways into passive patterns. Emotional withdrawal, irritability over small things that aren't really what you're upset about, sarcasm, going through the motions while feeling completely checked out. And I get why this happens. Because expressing resentment directly feels dangerous. It feels ungrateful, disruptive, selfish, like you're asking for too much or causing problems where there shouldn't be any. Especially for women who've built their identity around being capable and easy and not making waves. The idea of actually saying, this isn't working for me anymore, or I need things to change, can feel impossible. So you suppress it, you redirect it, you manage it. But here's the thing. None of those responses actually resolve resentment. They just bury the information deeper. And buried resentment doesn't disappear, it hardens. It leaks out in ways you don't intend. It shows up in your body as tension, as insomnia, as chronic fatigue. It affects your relationships in ways that are harder to repair than if you'd addressed it earlier. Okay, so this is important and I want to be really clear about it. Gratitude is not the antidote to resentment. I know that's often what we're told. Just focus on what you're grateful for. Count your blessings. Remember how good you have it. And look, gratitude is a genuinely helpful practice when you're resourced. When you have capacity and you're using gratitude to orient towards what's meaningful and good in your life. But when you're depleted, when you're running on empty, being told to be grateful often just increases shame. Because here's what happens. The part of you that's resentful already knows that there are things to be grateful for. You know your life could be worse. You know other people have bigger problems. You know you're privileged in many ways. That's not the issue. The issue is that you're overextended. You're giving beyond your capacity. You're not being replenished. And telling yourself to be more grateful doesn't address that underlying problem. It just adds another layer of should on top of an already overwhelming load. Resentment isn't cured by mindset shifts or gratitude journaling. It's resolved through actual recalibration of how you're living, how you're giving, and what you're allowing to be asked of you. So if gratitude doesn't fix it and suppression doesn't work, what does resentment want from you? Resentment is asking very specific questions. Where am I giving without genuine choice? Where am I carrying responsibility that isn't actually mine to carry? Where am I silencing my own limits to keep everything running smoothly? Where am I staying quiet to avoid conflict or disruption? Where am I saying yes when my body is screaming no? Now, these aren't easy questions to sit with, especially for women who've built their entire lives and identities around being capable, being reliable, being the one people can count on, being emotionally available. And this is so me. So I get you. The idea of pulling back, of saying, actually, can't do this anymore, can feel like dismantling who you are. But here's what resentment is not asking you to do. It's not asking you to blow up your life. It's not asking you to leave your relationship or quit your job or stop caring about your children. What it's asking is much more precise than that. It's asking you to stop abandoning yourself inside the life you're living. It's asking you to bring your actual capacity and your actual limits into the conversation instead of constantly overriding them to keep everything functioning. Perimenopause essentially removes your ability to ignore these signals. The cost of self suppression rises sharply. What once felt tolerable or manageable now feels unbearable. Your system stops cooperating with patterns that don't serve it. And this isn't a flaw in you. This is actually a biological invitation to renegotiate how you live, how you relate, how you give, what you allow to be expected of you. Resentment is often the first place women notice something fundamentally needs to change. And if you listen to it early, if you treat it as legitimate information rather than a character defect, it can guide you towards something more sustainable. But if you shame it, if you suppress it, if you keep trying to override it with discipline or gratitude or positive thinking, it festers. It becomes harder to unravel, and eventually something breaks. Look, if resentment has been showing up for you, if you've been feeling that quiet, simmering frustration or irritation or sense of, I can't keep doing this, I want to say this really clearly. It doesn't mean you're being unkind. It doesn't mean you're failing at motherhood or partnership or being a good person. It doesn't mean you've become bitter or difficult or ungrateful. What it means is that your system is done paying costs it can no longer afford. Resentment is not the enemy here. It's information. It's your body trying to protect you from patterns that are unsustainable. And when you learn to read it without judgment, when you can say, okay, what is this trying to tell me? Instead of, what's wrong with me for feeling this way? It becomes a doorway back to yourself, back to your actual limits and needs and capacity, back to a way of living that doesn't require constant self abandonment. I'm Philippa, and this is Unapologetic Edge. Thanks for listening.